Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today, we cover the huge news coming out of Bangladesh and the continuing upheaval next door in Manipur. We look how India is celebrating the 5th anniversary of the revocation of Article 370 for J&K. And we remember the 12th anniversary of one of the worst mass killings of Sikhs in the US. And we've talked about hockey a lot, but today we're going to take a look at the colder version on ice and how Sikhs have impacted the National Hockey League. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus. And we're talking my kind of hockey here in Canada because most of the time our viewers and yourself, when we talk hockey, you're thinking field hockey and grass hockey, so we're talking the real stuff.
Indeed. And of course, James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. Of course, as always, we'll be taking a look at your great comments that have been pouring in as usual after our videos towards the end of the show. But let's get the show on the road. James, what have you got to start us off with today?
Let's start with that ice hockey because I know I've got people curious going, what is ice hockey? No. But we've talked about a lot of different hockey stories on the series, but we've never really talked about how the Sikhs have impacted the NHL. Now, in Vancouver, we have a very large Sikh population, but with that, we also have a very large Sikh population that's into hockey. So much so that the broadcasters here have actually also started broadcasting in Punjabi. It is a real precedent set because in the NHL, there's not a lot of foreign language broadcasts. And they've tried with Chinese, with Mandarin, with other languages, and they just haven't really caught on. But the Punjabi one has created an amazing following. And that just shows how much with the Sikhs in Canada going back to the late 1800s, how much they have brought to the culture and adapted to the Canadian sports, as well as bringing their own. So it's been really great. I thought we'd just pull up an article that I loved, and it was from the Hockey News. And they did a story back in April during Sikh month, and that's to celebrate Sikh heritage across Canada. And my apologies, it's the Hockey Writers, not the Hockey News. And what I wanted to do is just kind of jump down, and there's some information about the Sikhs and the interest in hockey, but I didn't want to spend too much time because we've got so many stories to cover today, but I wanted to give you an introduction. As I said, the Sikh broadcasts have brought in amazing viewership and ad revenue for the league and for the Vancouver Canucks. Now, of course, that translates over. There have been players in the history of the Canucks that have played that have really been leaders to develop the future of hockey in Canada, and that is with minority children. Not only with the Sikh community, but others of darker skin or that look a little different. And that's because most of them traditionally have been white. Surprising as it may be, that's the truth. So, of course, now that there's been representation going back to the 1980s, but very rare for the Sikhs to have that coverage in the league, and especially the National Hockey League, which is considered one of the top in the world. So for them to make it there, they've definitely developed the skills, they've worked hard, and they have trained. Believe me, there's 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock a.m. games that parents are getting up to drive their kids to. And some people around the world think that's crazy, but that's because there's such a shortage of rink time in Canada that they have to book them that early to get the kids on the ice in order to get enough time for all the teams. So it's a very dedicated sport for not only the kids, but the parents who need to get up that early to drive them and, pay for all the equipment and so forth. So let's take a look first at Robin Bala. He was skating for the Washington Capitals and became the first player of South Asian origin to play in the NHL. But again, he came from Duncan, British Columbia, which is on Vancouver Island. He played in 61 games over parts of 4 seasons from 89 to 94 with the Capitals, the Canucks, San Jose Sharks, and the Anaheim Ducks. So, of course, he got to play in his home city with Duncan just across the water over on Vancouver Island, it would have been very common for his parents and family and friends to be able to make the trip on the ferry to watch the games. And he also acted as a huge influence on young Sikh players and, as I said, other minority players who entered into hockey, but they didn't see their race or their skin colors reflected on the ice. So this was a huge step. And a lot of people at the time were looking at, the superstars, Mario Lemieux, Pavel Bure, who was another Canuck, the Russian Rocket, the great one, Wayne Gretzky, among others. And this was just a huge opportunity for them to be able to relate and see themselves making it to the NHL level. So, of course, he also inspired other players such as Manny Malhotra. Now, Manny Malhotra played on several teams. He was actually born and raised in Mississauga, Ontario, which is just a suburb of Toronto. Now, his parents were very dedicated, but Manny himself actually was playing for the Vancouver Canucks at one point where he suffered a catastrophic eye injury where his eye has never been the same. There were doubts whether he would ever see out of that eye again, and the Canucks didn't want to risk it with him. They didn't want to risk his health and his long-term recovery, so they tried to push him into retirement, but he was not ready. He was dedicated, but he fought the injury and to recover and actually played several more seasons in the NHL for other teams, and then came back to be an assistant coach, including working in the coaching staff of the Vancouver Canucks. And when he did return, let me tell you, the Coliseum was just, they raised the rafters with the applause and standing ovations. He was a fan favorite and one of my favorites watching as I was younger. So, of course, being a diehard Canucks fan, I'm in my bubble thinking they're going to win the cup every year. But let me tell you, Malhotra really played a huge role on the team back in the day, and he protected his players. He played like an all-star, and I just can't say enough about him. But also he was very involved in the community and contributed a lot to different charitable organizations, Children's Hospital, the Canucks Foundation, and so many more. So just a top of the league gentleman. But again, celebrating that he showed the leadership that the Sikhs can bring as well as the skill. So it was just amazing. Of course, Juka Kara. I don't know much about this player, but he was from Surrey, British Columbia, here in my town here. But he's played in 337 NHL games, mostly as an Edmonton Oiler, which I'll try not to hold that against him since they're one of our rivals. But at the same time, it just shows that there has been a big impact and a surgence of Sikh players in the league. Now let's talk about Ashdeep Bains, a current Vancouver Canuck who has been making waves in the league. He is going back and forth between the Vancouver Canucks and the Abbotsford Canucks, which are their farm team. So he, again, has been a major role model for children and teens throughout British Columbia and across Canada to really represent the Sikh people, but also just athleticism in itself. The guy has an amazingly positive attitude. He has a die-hard work ethic, and he brings a lot to the league, but also as a mentor to the youth, he is just phenomenal. So where are Sikhs going in the future is one of the questions they asked in this article, and I think they're only going to get more representation on the ice. I would love to see goalies. I'd love to see, top offensive, top scorers. And Ashdeep Bains has got the ability to be one of the top in the league, I think, in a few years once he develops more. So that is a bit about here in Canada with ice hockey as opposed to the grass and field hockey and other things they call hockey. But again, that is Canada's national sport. And I just thought that I would share that with you because we want to bring you a light story every once in a while instead of everything being so serious. We want to add a bit of fun to the show. And I think that this really helps for you to understand the amazing contributions in the National Hockey League and where it's going in the future, Angus. We'll have to get you over to Canada so we can put a hockey jersey on you and get you out to a real game.
Yeah, fascinating. I must confess that I didn't understand half of it, but clearly it is not just a passion. I think it's even a religion in Canada by all accounts. But actually, it's great to see that the Sikh community. The Sikh community have really made great inroads into the sport, and it's no surprise actually because of course sport is such an important part for the Sikh community. They've always prided themselves on their athleticism, and of course their martial arts, and of course the whole physicality of life has been a central part of so much of the Sikh culture. Most of the processions, parades, public events are all centred around athletic abilities. We have all sorts of sports events, and particularly these martial fighting events, which make such great spectacles. Obviously, all with their roots back in the old days, back in the old Punjab and the Sikh Empire, where they made such great warriors. But of course, this today is the modern day extension of that. And ice hockey, well, you cannot get more physical and brutal, James, as I notice, than in an ice hockey match. It's terrifying to watch.
It gets competitive out there.
Yeah. It is. I mean, I think some of the greatest physical fights, legal fights that I've ever seen have taken place on an ice hockey rink. So it is no surprise that Sikhs have.
We won't go there.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I have to say, and Mani Malhotra was on I was going to say on the pitch, on the rink for 26 years. I mean, that is an incredible career in any sport, particularly
coming
a
back
sport
after that eye injury. I mean, the dedication and just the determination is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean the guy is in his mid-40s when he finally retired. I mean, I know how I felt in my mid-40s. I could barely kick a ball around a pitch. Never mind sustain at the top end of one of the most physical games on the planet. So it's I have to hold a huge amount of respect for all ice hockey players, but particularly well done to Malhotra for that. So yeah, fascinating insight. Thanks for that, James.
And for him to transition into coaching like he has and offer that leadership to the next generation is phenomenal as well. So, I mean, that not all players can make that transition. So, but let's move along, Angus, to the next story here. So we try to keep in our timeline again for a change, you know. Now, let's take us back to a more serious situation. And that, of course, is in Manipur. Over 59,000 people have been displaced due to the violence and the situation there. Now, this is according to the Chief Minister, Byron Singh, and he says that more than 200 people have been killed and thousands rendered homeless in the ethnic violence that's going on there. And we'll scroll down a bit here to show you some of the images that were included in this article here. And it shows that the violence is just a daily occurrence and it's non-stop. Over 11,133 houses were destroyed. So if you can imagine a small part of, Vancouver or, there in London, one of the small communities just completely wiped out and burned. But not only, we've seen it here with forest fires, but I'm talking just a violent rage of arson and attacks. It's just unheard of or unfathomable for us in the West. It is a level of violence that is just wreaking havoc not only there, but it seems to be happening in communities or in countries around the globe. Replying to question from Congress, MLA K. Ranjit Byron Singh said 133 houses were destroyed in fire in the violence in the state. He said 25,000 rupees has been paid for the first installment to the bank accounts of 2,792 people under the One Family, One Lock scheme, which I really haven't had a chance to research, but I would assume that's more of a social program to help people through this situation and the poverty levels that are being hit. Because, of course, with that level of violence, of course, everyone's income, their work, their businesses, if they're not destroyed, they are definitely disrupted. And that has been such a horrific event that it doesn't seem like there's any end in sight. And that's where the government at a federal level needs to take into account the situation, all of the cultures and the clashing that's going on, and develop a strategic plan in which there can be a ceasefire, so to speak, in the violence and the arsons and the anger. and try to bring all parties together to find a negotiated solution to this. What that solution is, of course, I have no idea, or I would be there to present it. But yeah, I don't know what the solution is going to be, except that it's not going to happen if people don't start talking, communicating, and really putting a control down to stop the violence and the escalation as we've seen over the last several months, Angus.
Yeah, it's an ongoing tragedy up in northeast India in this Manipur region, and again, it's just down to simple tribal violence, and it's the imposition of new rules by the BJP government that basically run over the old rules, where the reserved status of some of the tribes, they were guaranteed a certain number of roles in government and education and basically administrative roles. And the BJP have changed the rules and have upset many of the tribes, particularly the hill tribes. And it's what is noticeable about this whole story is that it's just the complete silence from Delhi. There's Narendra Modi has been criticised since this time, in fact, no, not this time last year, since from 18 months ago, when it really first started kicking off, that he said nothing about it. There was no direct governmental interest almost in the whole story. It was just the battles were kicking off, people were dying, houses were being burnt, this intertribal violence was just escalating, and nothing was being done by central government. And clearly even now.
It wasn't even until it broke on social media where some people were able to get some coverage out and report on it that Narendra Modi even acknowledged it.
Yeah, and it's because it's to do with ethnic minorities and religious minorities, and it's the Christians again who are losing out, particularly here, and the Muslims, and it's again because I think it's the peripheries of India. That they're almost out of sight, out of mind from Delhi and the central cow belt. I mean, who cares about Manipur? Well, the people of Manipur care about Manipur. And of course, there has been quite a long-term historic undercurrent of a drive for independence for Manipur. And I strongly suspect, should Khalistan and when Khalistan happens, I think there could be this domino effect. And I think one of those dominoes to topple over will be Manipur. I think it is quite feasible that Manipur and a large part of northeast India will naturally break away and demand independence. So there has been, there has been a small, low-level fight for this, but it only takes a small catalytic event to trigger something a little bit more significant. And as we'll come on to one of my stories, we'll talk about how these chain of events can suddenly cascade out of control. So I think my advice to Mr. Modi, not that he would be in the least bit interested in my advice, is you better deal with it, and deal with it in a fair and just way. Otherwise, you are sitting on a tinderbox, is he not, James?
Oh, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it comes down to the responsibility of the federal leadership to look after all people covered under the Constitution and that, call themselves citizens of your country. It's your responsibility to care for them and to provide a safe place for them as a part of your government rule. So, I just can't implore enough how much failure is going on in working with the people to create solutions, and by changing laws and underreporting the deaths as well is not helping.
Yeah, well, I think there is a massive lesson to be learnt about many things that are going on. I'm going to lead on to my first story now, which of course are the big events in Bangladesh, and this is a very salutary lesson to leaders of all countries around the world. And ironically, I'm even looking at the leader of the UK at the moment. We have our own riots kicking off because of a deaf government who is not listening to the people of its country. Right. And in Bangladesh, as probably most of our audience have realised over the weekend, big events have happened. And this is where the sitting president of Bangladesh, Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, has fled the country after 15 years in charge. She fled the country yesterday after more than a month of deadly protests, and the military finally, as a result, announced it would form an interim government in her absence. Now, Hasina had fought very hard to quell these protests that had spread right across the country. And the protests were against her government, and they've been kicking off since about a month ago, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. But it really reached a head over the weekend. And in fact, on Sunday, at least 100 people were killed in some of the riots and the protests. Now, the army chief, General Waqar-uz-Zaman, said in a public broadcast that he made to the nation over the weekend on the state channel that Hasina had resigned and that the military would then take control and form what he called a caretaker government. So it's not a military coup, it's just that the military are stepping in the interim, just to at least administer the governance of the country.
Yeah.
And of course, jubilant crowds then stormed and looted Hasina's official residence. Now, yesterday, at least 56 people were killed during ongoing violence, mainly in the capital Dhaka, but also across other cities across Bangladesh. And gangs had, of course, taken advantage of the situation. They launched revenge attacks on Hasina's allies. And I talk about lessons to world leaders. Millions took to the streets and jubilant crowds waved flags. Some danced on top of tanks in the streets. Thousands broke through the gates of Hasina's residence. Others later stormed the parliament. And one of the main channels, Channel 24, broadcast images of crowds running into the Prime Minister's compound, grinning and waving to the camera, looting furniture and books or relaxing on beds. Mob rule took charge. The mobs raided and ransacked the homes of Hassani's Awami League Party allies, as well as police stations. And others torched television stations that backed Hasina's rule and smashed statues of her father. That was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He was the guy who achieved independence originally for Bangladesh, and set fire to a museum to him. And security forces had supported Hasina's government throughout the unrest, which began last month in the form of protests. So there were small-scale protests that started in early July against something very simple. They were against civil service job quotas, and then escalated. And I'll come back to these points because these are very important and relevant. And these simple protests escalated into wider calls for her to stand down. Now, Hasina fled the country. She's 76 years old. She fled by helicopter, and the reports were that she landed in New Delhi. But those reports have been denied in India itself. But apparently reports, insiders have said she landed in New Delhi, but they reckon she's only transiting the country, apparently en route to here in the UK and London. Now, our observers have said her departure would leave a major vacuum. Of course they will, and the country is in uncharted territory. The coming days are critical because, of course, it is in a very volatile situation. Anything could happen. Demonstrations began over, and I referred earlier to the reintroduction of a quota scheme that reserved more than half of all government jobs for certain groups. And I'm saying this slowly because there are lessons here that we're going to talk about. So, it started over the reintroduction of a quota scheme that reserved more than half of all government jobs for certain groups. How significant is that? The protests escalated despite the scheme being scaled back by Bangladesh's top court. And the total number of killed since the violence started is over 350. Soldiers and police in several cases did not intervene to stem the protests over the weekend, unlike during the past month of rallies that repeatedly ended in deadly crackdowns. So clearly the police realised the writing on the wall, the police realised it was running out of control, and that they had reached this tipping point, this threshold, where people power was actually winning against the governance of the country. And so her government was accused by rights groups of, quote, misusing state institutions to entrench its hold on power and stamp out dissent. And again, I'm saying this slowly and clearly because this is important, including through the extrajudicial killing of opposition activists. And I'll repeat that because this is important. Government was accused of misusing state institutions to entrench its hold on power and stamp out dissent, including through the extrajudicial killing of opposition activists. So, this is really significant and just relevant to the northeast of India. Of course, Bangladesh sits next to the state of Tripura, which Manipur that we've just been talking about. Tripura is sandwiched between Manipur and Bangladesh, and of course there's concern in Tripura state that Bangladeshis are going to flee across the border And Pradyot Manikya Debbarma, who's the current Maharaja of Tripura, has said a strong anti-India sentiment was growing in Bangladesh. Tripura, West Bengal, Meghalaya and Assam will be on the front line of anything that occurs there. The government of India must have a plan B in case something happens now or in the future. The native people are the best defence. So basically the government of India are putting up a wall across that border and saying nobody is crossing into India from Bangladesh. So that's as a side note. So I very deliberately read out some very clear statements in what's happening in Bangladesh. The lesson here to leaders, and I'm particularly looking at one certain leader in India, is that if you sit atop a government that quells and oppresses your people through using your state institutions to oppress political dissent, that if extrajudicial killings happen on a regular basis, and of course they have been happening on a regular basis in the past in the Punjab, if essentially your government needs brute force and needs to use its or abuse its government entities to oppress its people and oppress dissent, it can very quickly spiral out of control. And note here in Bangladesh, this started, now of course there has been an undercurrent of unhappiness for a long time, so the wood was on the fire ready, it just needed a spark to ignite it. That spark was something very small, it was something very innocuous. It was something about, again, I'm looking at Manipur here, about quotas for a small number of people. In other words, a large number of jobs were being awarded to a small number of people. Again, it's protecting your own, it's protecting the elite. And what happens is that people get unhappy about this. And of course, the more of them than there are of you. And it only takes something very small, that spark, to ignite that tinderbox. And this is what's happened in Bangladesh, where a small protest over weeks then escalated, it grew bigger and bigger. And the people realised, we've got a chance here to topple our government. And finally, they reached that point where even the police realised it's all about gathering momentum. And this is what I talk about regularly in India. It only takes a small event, and events very, very quickly can spiral out of control. Those dominoes start falling. And it only takes the momentum to reach that tipping point where even the police and eventually the army realise, we're going to lose this. And they, of course, then switch sides. And it is that point when governments topple very quickly, literally in a matter of hours. And then suddenly the mob takes over and they overrun, they wreak the revenge, as has happened here. Hasina and her allies have now all their palaces, their allies' palaces and homes have been ransacked by angry mobs who have finally had the people power to take control. So, James, a very important lesson to Narendra Modi and to other leaders around the world. This isn't the first time this has happened, and it will not be the last.
No, and there for Bangladesh, I mean, they are seeing the worst bloodshed that they've had since 1971 with their War of Independence. And the military chief has now come out and said that not only are the military ordered not to shed bullets at civilians and protesters, but that he is guaranteeing a full and enhanced investigation to ensure that any of those responsible for deaths and injuries are held accountable, regardless as to their position within government or military. We'll have to wait and see if this is more than just words to calm a rowdy public. But at the same time, I hope that it does take to fruition that they do hold them accountable for these, again, atrocious crimes that are going on at the hands of a government. And again, they've been, the subject of 20, I believe it's been about 20 coups or coup attempts since their independence in 1971. And to imagine that's as long as I've been alive. So, you figure every couple of years they're suffering either a coup or a coup attempt. There's just so much instability. And this was just another time where governments didn't listen to the people and really pushed when they should have been actually listening and giving back. So
this is a lesson that never seems to be learnt by totalitarian regimes. I mean, I can immediately think of the Philippines, I can think of the Ceausescu regime in East Europe. These things happen on a regular occurrence, even throughout recent history. And yet, totalitarian leaders don't they don't realise that they are accountable to their people. Even if they think they've got total control, eventually the people always win. And particularly in so-called democratic countries, it doesn't matter how hard you try and oppress or take control, the people always win in the end. Soviet Union is another example where the Soviet Union was toppled. Sadly, it's gone in the wrong direction again since then. But of course, there have been so many historic examples where regimes have toppled literally in a matter of days because the people finally have been able to gather together, organise themselves, and as I say, it just escalates out of control. It's like a train that runs out of control. Once it starts going, there is nothing on the planet that will stop it. So, a very important lesson. And let's move that lesson on to another region, Jammu and Kashmir, which is my second story now.
We haven't talked much about Angus.
Indeed, and let's see if lessons are ever going to be learnt about about Jammu and Kashmir. We are, of course, yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the revocation of Article 370, supported by the Supreme Court in Delhi, where Narendra Modi basically tore up an article of the Indian Constitution and took direct rule, presidential rule of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, every anniversary, and it has happened again here yesterday, the Indian government, this so-called democratic government, who took forcible control of the states of Jammu and Kashmir, they lock up and house arrest all the local leaders. And this has happened again. National Conference chief spokesperson Tanvir Sadiq and its youth president Salman Sagar were detained in their homes yesterday. It's Iltija Mufti, daughter of former J&K Chief Minister and PDP leader Mehbooba Mufti, also posted pictures of the gates to their house being locked. So, on the 5th anniversary of this revocation, several mainstream politicians in the valley said they were detained in their homes, while others were, quote, advised not to leave their premises, basically an intimidatory threat from the government. The local BJP unit, meanwhile, they took out a celebratory procession in Srinagar, saying that Kashmir gained its freedom on August the 5th. Really? It's freedom? I wonder whose freedom. And quotes continue to say, if Kashmir is as normal as government of India claims it to be, why does the J&K police place us under illegal house arrest on the 5th of August every year? The arrogance is such that SHO Nogam has locked us up inside our own house and taken the keys away. Cops or New Age jailers, you decide. A national conference said this blatant suppression of mainstream democratic activities only serves to showcase the administration's underlying fear and exposes the hollowness of their claims of progress over the past 5 years. And terming the anniversary, and terming the original date of August 5th, 2019, a stark reminder of the disempowerment of the people of J&K. And the party also highlighted the absence of a democratically elected government in the region since that time in 5 years. The unilateral and undemocratic decisions made in August 2019 are a betrayal of the promises made to the people of Jammu and Kashmir by New Delhi. And referring to the BJP's celebration in Srinagar, the Vice President of Congress, Omar Abdullah, said on Twitter, or X, this is what passes for democracy and free speech in J&K. A handful of BJP leaders are encouraged to celebrate today, while those who would have registered their protest against what was done to J&K are locked up in homes across the valley. And another politician quoted, 5 years on, there's no elected assembly, the locals have no say in running their own affairs. Sadly, there aren't enough powerful voices in the country to ask questions on why J&K has been selectively targeted for such humiliating existence. And PDP President Mehbooba Mufti underscored that August 5th, 2019 would go down in history not just as a dark day for J&K, but a blot on Indian democracy. She said it was a day when a semi-autonomous state was disempowered, dismembered and robbed of everything special and sacrosanct to us. And since then, the state has been threatened into silence, which is touted as peace and normalcy to the rest of the country. And to really rub salt into the wound of all this, Narendra Modi, who is the figurehead behind this outrage, this democratic outrage of J&K, he's just written a book titled 370, Undoing the Unjust, a new future for J&K. And the publishers of this book have said publicly, this is part of their press release, it sheds light on the historical reluctance to challenge this provision, that's Article 370, and the eventual paradigm shift brought about by its abrogation in 2019. Through careful examination, this book discusses how the government resolved legal complexities and safeguarded against security threats to successfully execute the historical decision. Big, bold words. And External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has said, the book was an account of a crucial decision that has promoted national integration while transforming the development and security landscape of J&K. It brings out how the police calculations and personal proclivities of an earlier era were finally countered by national sentiment. And it goes on about how wonderful it is to unite J&K into the embrace of India. Well, I think the people of J&K, most of the people, the indigenous Muslims particularly, are not perhaps in agreement with much of what has been said about all this. They're not in agreement with Mr. Modi and his wonderful book coming out, saying what a great achievement his revocation of Article 370 was. And of course, I think imprisoning all the local political leaders every 5th of August is not really much of a democratic act. And the fact that now the BJP are out in the streets celebrating this event, while the local indigenous people are being essentially held under house arrest. Now, I think in any definition of democracy, I can't see that written anywhere. James, I think this is just another example of this fake democracy that sits in India, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. Excuse me. I mean, how many stories have we done on J&K lately just on the violence and the clashes and the results of this policy and regime and, the legal changes? They are definitely, I can say, not enjoying life as they should. They are not celebrating life as they should. And they sure as hell aren't seeing a reduction in violence and decisiveness that we would love to see them having peace and going about a great and optimistic future, and they're not having it. So it just goes to show how full of himself Modi is, we'll say.
It is very typical of an arrogant, oppressive leader, the statements that he's made. But of course, I mean, we do acknowledge that there has been an Islamic militant problem in J&K, but one has to ask why. Why is that militant problem in existence? It is primarily because J&K, the indigenous people of J&K, do not clearly want to be part of this greater India, that they are culturally deeply different. Religiously, they are a minority in the whole of India, but they're not a minority within J&K itself. They don't feel clearly part of India, which is why there has been this huge and militant backlash against Delhi, saying, we don't agree with your imposition of your administration. And in response, Delhi has basically responded by pouring in brute force, 500,000 troops. It is only keeping a lid on the situation by sheer brute force. And we only need to look at Bangladesh. And as we just talked about, you oppress a population. It only takes a small catalytic event. And there is only so much that brute force can work. Now, brute force has kept a lid on it. Presidential rule and 500,000 Indian troops have managed to keep a lid on it. But all you're doing is you're keeping a lid on a boiling pot. And boiling pots only go in one direction. So we will see, but time will tell. Okay, let's move on as well.
Violence only begets more violence, so let's hope that it
Exactly. The lesson never seems to be learned. So we're up against the clock again, so let's move on to my final story of the day, and it's a very sad one actually. And this is the commemoration of a terrible event that occurred yesterday, 12 years ago yesterday, on August the 5th, 2012. It was known as the Wisconsin Sikh temple shooting, and it was a mass shooting that took place at the Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And it happened when a 40-year-old Wade Michael Page fatally shot 6 people and wounded 4 others. And a 7th victim died of his wounds many years later, 2020. And he committed suicide at the end of this by shooting himself in the head. Now, the Gurdwara at the time was preparing langar for later in the day. And so it was believed that women and children were there preparing, ready for people arriving later that morning. The six victims killed included one lady, Paramjit Kaur, who was 41, and 5 men aged 65, 39, 41, 49 and 84. Now, Page, the perpetrator, wounded a police officer, and after being shot in the stomach by another, he fatally shot himself in the head. So he killed himself after committing this horrible act. He was, in fact, himself an American white supremacist and an army veteran from Cousineau, Wisconsin. And apart from the shooter himself, all of the dead were members of the Sikh faith. The incident drew responses from President Obama at the time and Indian Prime Minister at the time, Manmohan Singh. Dignitaries attended candlelit vigils in countries across the world, including US, Canada and India. And Michelle Obama visited the temple herself on August the 23rd, a couple of weeks later that same year. Now, the injured included one of the responding police officers, Lieutenant Brian Murphy, and he was shot 15 times at close range, including one shot in the face and once in the back of the head. Incredible that he got out of this alive. He was discharged from the hospital a couple of weeks later, and Sikhs for Justice pledged a $10,000 award to Officer Murphy. And 2 Sikh residents of Yuba City, California, donated a further $100,000 to Lieutenant Murphy and praised his bravery. Now, many Sikh Americans didn't approve of the protests that followed in India in India against the United States, because apparently this did provoke protests in India. And the Sikh community condemned those protests, and those protests included flag burnings. And Jathedar Jani Gurbachan Singh, who I think was the Akali Dal Jathedar at the time, called the shooting itself a security lapse by the US government. He didn't endorse any of the protests though, but he said it was a security lapse by the US government and recommended that Sikhs in the US adopt all possible security measures at their temples. And since 2013, the Sikh Coalition has encouraged Sikhs to use the National Day of Seva to honour the lives of those lost in this particular shooting. And political scientist Nonihal Singh criticised the media response at the time, pointing out that the shooting received less media attention than other similar shootings. Of course, unfortunately, the US is unfortunately renowned for mass shootings. But he suggested that this was due to the racial and religious identities of the shooter and victims. So yeah, not much to say really about this other than it's just a terrible, tragic event. Unfortunately, mass shootings just seem to be a fact of life in the US. But this one, particularly for the Sikh community in the US, is an awful thing to have happened. And it does, of course, link to the security measures that are now being protocoled across the world by the SGPC. Because, of course, hate crimes are on the increase, unfortunately, and Gurdwaras across the world are now being asked to step up their security. Hate crimes that we've reported on regularly are occurring. Fortunately, thank heavens, they not of this nature. But transnational repression do seem, of course, to be the main concern. But yeah, James, a very, very sad story.
Yeah, and other places of worship and religious facilities as well. I mean, the hate crimes are... just makes you shake your head, because you can't have a political arena in the US as divided as it is and expect things to get better. So we can only hope that come November, things start to calm down there and there's a cohesive plan to bring the nation back together, because it sure is fragmented right now.
Yeah, and I think one positive side of this story is very typical of the Sikh community, and I do notice this a lot in tragic events, is the financial donations from the Sikh Coalition and individuals from the community in California. These large financial donations to the family of the officer who was so terribly wounded in that incident. So again, it's just this selfless service, this seva concept of the Sikh religion, which is such a noble thing. So. Okay, let's try and cheer things up a bit. Let's move on to our comments section, which is always very well received. So a very relevant first comment from one of our shows last week, and that we are talking about hate crimes and the sacrilegious attacks against the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And the first comment, Hap B, comments that this man, this particular attack, this was in India, this one, and this man who went to do biadbi, that's a sacrilegious offence, got caught. He confessed that someone had given him money to do this act. And of course, when the culprits are handed over to the police, they're quickly released. Basically, the police are not doing their job. So, of course, the Sikhs had to take matters into their own hands. We talked about the Nihungs. And Awesome Stevie replies, that's what happens when you don't have a Raj, no freedom, no sovereignty. The enemy who commits biadbi isn't going to prosecute themselves. Of course they don't. And of course in India, if these acts are perpetrated by Hindu activists, of course then the strongly pro-Hindu nationalist government, they're not going to go to great efforts to prevent these activities, are they, James? It's pretty common sense.
Not when it's in their favour.
Indeed, and we often say who polices the police themselves. That's the problem here. Now, Jasleen, one of our regulars, made a very long comment, and I've had to cut it down because there were a lot of very, very good points made in this one single comment. And for the purpose of time, I've just singled down to the first main point. And Jasleen says, with regard to these individuals who go into Gurdwaras to disrespect the sacred scriptures, they have no respect for their own religion. This point is made, actually. They make a mockery of their own revered, or as not is the case, deities like Krishnan, whose character is depicted more like a Bollywood flamboyant hero rather than any form of sort of spiritual figure. And also look at the state of the Ganges, which is supposed to be the pivotal point of Hindutva, and yet what do? They chuck their human waste, and of course their dead bodies, into this so-called holy river. So very good point, the hypocrisy of Hindutva. So how on earth would these people respect other religions? Because they clearly don't even respect their own. So there's no point trying to educate them. And of course, Jasleen makes the comment that, eventually she makes the comment that in fact, why are we yoked together to the Hindus? In fact, by an indirect implication, Jasleen is saying, well, why don't we have our own Sikh homeland, of course, which we argue about on a regular basis. So a very valid point.
Right.
And the final point on this story from last week, let me check, makes a very UK-specific comment. I assume you're referring to Priti Patel, our former Home Secretary in the Conservative government that lost power last month. Priti Patel is a puppet of the RSS and Modi's regime. So whatever she did in the past is for a Hindu agenda in the UK. And now she's against Sikhs. It's a very simple reason the RSS is commanding her, is controlling her. So this point is actually a very valid point. Priti Patel, when the Conservative government lost power in early July, they were succeeded by the Labour government, Keir Starmer, who, as we have reported now, appears to be betraying the Sikhs as well. But the Conservative Party have gone away to lick their wounds after being resoundingly beaten. I think that's an understatement in that last election. And Priti Patel now, so Rishi Sunak, a known practicing Hindu, is going to be ousted from his position. We know he's going to leave his position. And of course, all the many other leadership contenders are fighting now to be elected. The new leader of the Conservative Party, Priti Patel, is now fighting to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. This is important because if the Conservatives get it back into power at the next election in 4 or 5 years' time, then whoever is elected leader now may well be the UK's next Prime Minister. If Priti Patel is elected leader and she is a very strong contender, then she could be the next Prime Minister of the UK. And if this person is correct, that if she is indeed a stooge, a puppet, at least linked to or at least has a relationship with the RSS in India, that is not good news for British Sikhs. So we don't know, it's all speculation. But time will tell. I think there have been incidents in the past where Priti Patel the questions have been raised by the Sikh community about her allegiances. I think there are suspicions about her allegiances and indeed her potential threat to the Sikh community. Time will tell. But thank you for that comment, James. I don't know if you've got any comments on that. It's very specific to the UK.
No, I think that you've covered that. Again, it's, as you say, very specific to the UK. And, we've got elections coming up next year in Canada, so we'll have to watch and see what happens there.
Yeah, it's all about, and I think what is relevant across the Western world, it is very relevant that we have to watch these Indian diaspora MPs, people who raise these political positions, what are their links to the RSS and the Indian administration, the Indian establishment? Because that is very relevant to obviously to our democratic rule. Okay, a podcast, an interview I did with Dr. Gurinder Singh Grewal last week. We talked about the betrayal of the Sikhs. The theme of the whole podcast was about the continuing betrayal of Sikhs across certainly the 20th century and into the 21st century. And we received a lot of comments about that, of course, because it does touch a very sore nerve in the Sikh community, this whole topic. Harbinder Sandhu made a very interesting comment. In answer to my question, I always asked, as I said regularly, I always ask my guests, why is it that the Brahmins, the Indian establishment, fear and hate the Sikh community so much? And as I say, I always get lots of different answers, but they all follow a similar theme. And it is pretty obvious why, but I'm very interested to hear all these experts' specific thoughts on this, because it does flesh out the skeleton of why it happens. And Harbinder Sandhu makes this comment, why Gandhi and Nehru were so scared during partition and afraid of Sikhs. If I may add something to Dr. Grewal's reply, because they knew that if these Sikhs can bring back Somnath Temple's doors that was looted by Mahmud of Ghazni 922 years earlier, if these Sikhs can walk in the streets of Peshawar, that's in Pakistan, which did form an original part of the original Punjab, if Sikhs can walk in the streets of Peshawar 800 years after the last Hindu king ruled that region, then they can reach Delhi any time. And plus, Congress leaders were trained and educated by the cunning colonial Britishers. These leaders were only academic leaders, so they had everything to fear from Sikh military might. That's why Sikhs were kept very far from power by all the parties, British Hindu leaders and Muslim leaders. So it brings up a very historic part of that region. And I must confess, I need to research more of this. I think this might make quite an interesting bit of historic research that we'll have a deeper look into what happened, particularly around Peshawar and the northwest frontier country around that time, because it clearly is relevant. So thank you for that comment. And Raza Qureshi raised another important point. I'm having to rush now because, again, we're up against the clock. There's a lot to get through. There's a lot of history lessons here, James, because I did research this one. Sikhs should have listened to Mr. Jinnah. And, of course, this is really important because partition has so much to talk about. It's so important to the events even happening today that this partition laid the foundations of so many of the problems that we discuss, James, on a daily basis. Now, this comment here, Raza Qureshi said that Sikhs should listen to Mr. Jinnah. Why should they listen to Mr. Jinnah? Now, at the time of partition in 1947, there was an awful lot of politics going on. And India was being torn, or this region of the British Empire was being torn apart. And of course, Muslims fled to Pakistan and Hindus fled across to India, what became India. And in the middle were the Sikhs, who were just torn apart and massacred in the horrible events at the time. Now, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was he? Well, he was a barrister, a politician, and he was the original founder of what became Pakistan. Now, Jinnah also served at the time as the leader of the All India Muslim League. And as the Republic of Pakistan's first Governor-General until his death, at the time he told the Akali Dal that if they were, at the time, instead to join Pakistan's quest for freedom, partition, the Punjab, he promised, would remain intact, and they could possibly then actually get more land. Now, apparently at the time, the Sikhs declined this offer, and instead Master Tara Singh was quoted as saying at the time that joining Pakistan would be like cholera or death for Sikhs, so they turned it down. So as a result of that, overtures were then made by Nehru from the Hindu side, and Nehru supposedly recognised those sacrifices made by the Sikhs for India's independence, because of course the Sikhs were at the forefront. They were instrumental in achieving Indian independence. But these promises were only made to the Sikhs by Nehru only after Jinnah had made his approach, and Nehru quickly realised that the Sikhs had rejected that offer and made his offer. Sikhs took it. I say took it. The Sikhs still refused to sign the constitution. But the Sikhs were left in this terrible position. But they were made all these promises, and they relied on those promises, which of course were reneged upon by Nehru. And Nehru made the statement to Master Tara Singh along the lines of, well, times have changed, so of course we've got to break our promises. And Well, we could talk for hours about that, but yes, thank you for that comment. It does raise up this whole concept of should indeed have Sikhs listened to Jinnah at the time. Who knows what could have happened? Many disagree with that statement. I know many would disagree with that, but it does show that it was such a difficult time in Indian politics. And what should the Sikhs have done? It's very easy to say in retrospect, but at the time it was a very volatile situation. Who knows what at the time what was the right way to go forward for the Sikhs? Right, rushing on to this next one.
Bringing in a lot of intelligence agencies that were not only collecting information on foreign nations, but also on their own people and watching what the Sikhs were doing as well. So it was an interesting time, as you said, in politics.
Yeah, it's very easy to judge in retrospect. It's very easy to judge from our armchairs now what was the right way and the wrong way to go. All that we should do is look forward now. We should look, okay, how can we move things forward? How can we achieve Khalistan? What is the right way? Because what is done now. So, okay, Gurdwara Singh Khalsa. Now, James, I don't know how your Punjabi is, but mine's brilliant because I can read this, thanks to Google Translate. And this comment, this is important. This person says in Punjabi, please let the news be explained in the Punjabi language. And awesome Stevie responded, I prefer English, maybe Punjabi subtitles or English ones in Punjabi videos. Now, I've read this one out because actually some people have asked, why can't we broadcast in Punjabi? Excuse me. Well, obviously, for one simple reason. James and I, our Punjabi is not very good. In fact, I think it doesn't even stretch to one word. So, excuse me. And so, unfortunately, James and I can't broadcast in Punjabi, we only broadcast in English. But the good news for you, Gurdwara Singh Khalsa, is that we do have a very extensive Punjabi broadcast channel. It's on the same channel. We have loads of programmes in Punjabi. I'm very sorry that James and I can't give our show in Punjabi. Maybe we ought to start learning, James.
That probably wouldn't be a bad idea. A second language is always good, and I'd much prefer to learn Punjabi than I would French. So,
well, maybe as and when Khalistan happens, we'll by then maybe we'll be fluent in Punjabi. But Gurdwara Singh Khalsa, if you can wait about 5 years for us to brush up our quick guide to Punjabi, we'll do a show in Punjabi. And as for subtitles, unfortunately, awesome Stevie, subtitles are generated by YouTube itself. We have no control over those. I don't know if we can have Punjabi. I don't know if it has a system to translate into Punjabi. We'll look into it, but unfortunately for the moment we are stuck with English and English subtitles. So, but who's to say what might happen in the future? Now, final comment, and again, this is an administrative one. Amrik Singh made a comment, no volume, and Guviel responded, it's fine, check your settings. Now, I did notice, this has happened in the past, actually, and I wanted to raise this one just as a bit of a guidance for some of our regular viewers. Amrik, no volume. I think this happens when we upload the show to YouTube. It takes about half an hour or so to process the show. And I don't know what YouTube does, but it does some sort of clever thing behind the scenes. I think it compresses the show. And it takes time for it to generate it in HD. And I think during that early stage, that there are issues sometimes with the volume. And I know your comment was very fast after the show first uploaded. I think you were the first comment, and this has happened with earlier comments that are the early comments. I think it may well be that you are too early, you're too quick. And I think if you wait a little bit longer, because clearly as the follow-up comment says, because nobody else had this issue, of course I think they watched the show a little bit after it was uploaded to YouTube. So I think if you have no volume, first obviously check the obvious things like is your mute button and everything on. But if that is not the case, then just wait a little while. I think it's a YouTube thing, and I think the volume should come on in due. I
do appreciate your excitement and your enthusiasm to watch the next episode.
Thank you. Indeed. And it's great because I always do like to see what the first comments are, and there always does seem to be a bit of a race. And we do, and I'm going to point out a couple of other comments where a couple of people have said hi and good morning, and I think it's because one of our earlier comments we did raise, we did acknowledge a lovely comment that just said good morning or something. And I know your game. I know the people are now putting up hi. Well, this is a general hi to all those who like a general mention, and they said this is a big mention for all of those who we don't mention, who do make lovely comments and really positive and supportive comments. And of course, we don't highlight those in this section because we like to talk about elements and educational things that our commenters bring up, but we don't actually obviously show so many of these lovely single word or simple sentences that many of you do put up, just supportive comments. And I think this is just a general thank you to each and every one of you. We do, of course, read all those comments, and every one that we receive just gives us a little warm feeling inside, doesn't it, James?
It certainly does, and we love all the comments, positive, negative. We love them all. So it's about you being a part of the show with us. So thank you.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think just to wrap things up today, we did receive a lovely email this morning, just before we came on air, and I thought I'd read this one out. And it came from Permjit Singh, and it said, I've watched your programme today and I want to say how grateful I am for it. Grateful not only because it's in English, and I'm ashamed to say my Punjabi is only basic, and that's very relevant to what we've just been talking about, but also for its breadth of coverage and for the passion you show for the stories you broadcast. Above all, I'm grateful that your platform provides an alternative narrative of what happened and is happening to the Sikhs and to the Punjab. So thank you very much indeed for that email. That is a lovely email to receive, and very much appreciated. And as I said, just a general thank you, as I always do like to pass on to all our viewers, and particularly to our commenters and our emailers. Your support keeps us going. It does keep this show on the road. It does keep us going, and it helps us provide what we hope is, as this person said, this alternative narrative of what is happening to the Sikh community, both in the Punjab and worldwide. So thank you once again. I'm sure, James, you'd like to say the same.
Absolutely. And again, the viewers are what keep us going, but it also is what keeps us on the air. So by all means, don't forget to invite all of your friends to watch it and share the program as well, please.
Indeed, but there we must bring things to a close. But thank you so much for watching. You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. Don't forget to keep those comments coming in. As you know, we do love to talk about them, and they form such a great part of the show. So do keep those coming in. And of course, as I did mention, you can message us directly at message@satellagetv.com. And of course, do highlight any news stories that we might have missed and that you would like us to cover. But in the meantime, thank you for watching Perspectives. It is goodbye from me, and it's a goodbye from James.
Stay safe out there and send us your videos as well.
Indeed, and you have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We'll see you next time.